I worked with Dorothy Osner in 1933 in a picture called Christopher Strong. And it's very interesting, always has been to me, that at that time, it didn't seem in the least odd that I was working with a woman director. Now I would consider it slightly peculiar, but then it was perfectly natural. She was accepted totally, not as a freak, but as a director. And she knew the business well. She was a damn good cutter and lots of fun. But remarkable that she could occupy that job 50-odd years ago and have no one say, Miss Heffern, would you mind working with a woman? Not at all. She was sweet and funny and did some very, very interesting stuff. She was one of the first to prove that women are not completely foolish.
So I'm walking across the street, and I hear these guys from the catering truck going. I turn and I go, you know you're whistling at the director, don't you?
And there was my image of a Hollywood person. He had his feet up on the desk. He was smoking a long cigar. It was way, of course,
and they wanted moral judgment. And when I said, no, they didn't give us any money, and we still owed so much money.
No, she's going to cry. And I said, I'll be just fine. I'm just going to the washroom. Don't worry about me. I'll be right back.
Like a volcano, I'd say. Not even a disgruntled lover has ever spoken to me that way, and I'm not staying in this meeting.
If I'm meant to say I am a woman with women in the women group on the women list, then I'm in
And I'm just getting there. It's because I'm a woman, you know. But I'm getting a sex change soon.
I mean, I went for my first jobs and said, I want to be a director. And they said, don't tell anybody you want to be a director. My God. Just tell them you're dying to be a production assistant. You really want to be a film editor someday, maybe. And whatever you do, get a manicure, wear eyelashes, and more makeup.
Being a film actress, the public sort of treats you in a different way, although, and they are famous, and they sort of, you are a star of a sort, and then they think, well, women are really a bit stupid, you know, especially if they're blonde, but a film actress is even more stupid than an ordinary woman. And of course, how can a film actress become a film director? It's not possible.
One guy, Harvey LaRock, who was the first camera assistant, said, you know, Sandy, I didn't even know. He had read the script, he'd seen Sandy Wilson and assumed that it was some short Scottish guy. And it wasn't until he actually met me, you know, at the motel, and I said, oh, hello, I'm Sandy Wilson, and I could see him sort of go like that. He didn't realize it was going to be a woman directing the picture.
The first day when I got on the set of Desperately Seeking Susan, I mean, I was a little nervous because it was the first time I was working with a union crew, and I had an impression about what they were going to be like, and I also was scared to death that they would see me walk on the set, and here I am. You know, I was about 31 at the time, and I'm about 5 feet tall and don't look all that intimidating, and I was afraid that they'd look at me and laugh.
The first time I went out to shoot a camera, I had to look at the notes as to how to run a camera, and I was sent off by myself, and I came back with 4 100-feet rolls all shot, and I thought perfectly exposed and such, and then discovered that I'd held the camera upside down. So my first footage was all upside down.
So I thought, oh, the first day of the shoot, God, it's going to be great, you know, and I got my have a big discussion with myself, what am I going to wear, you know, so that as the director, everybody understands, you're the director, you're the person who's directing this picture. Figure that one out. I had a wonderful first AD, a very good friend of mine, Ed Folger, and he said, well, and he's done a lot of features, and he knows what's what for what. I knew nothing from nothing, so I'm operating on total blind ignorance, you know, stupidity. And he says, well, would you like a binder? I said, what for? And he said, well, to put your script in. I said, I've written the script. I know the script. What do I need the script for? You know, from documentaries where you don't go out with a script. And he says, well, okay, and let it at that. So for the first day of the shoot, I sort of went out with a little bag, which is a little bit, I'll show you, it was a little bit like this. Little bag like this, much like today, lipstick, the hotel key, cab fare home.
The first day that I was shooting, and at the end of the day, I couldn't find my purse. So I said to one of the crew members, do you know where my purse is? Have you seen it? And he said, Penelope, directors don't carry purses.
I go out on the first day of the shoot. Hi, guys, here we are. The first day was more or less a real celebration, and Richard Leiterman carried me for that day. The second day, I started to get a little bit nervous because I realized there was a great deal of work to the whole process. And the third day was total blind terror because I thought, this is too much. This is really too much. And I learned very quickly how to do my shot list, how to do my homework. I carried my script with me. I put it in a big red binder. That became the Bible. That was, I mean, I felt naked without it.
A friend of mine, who's a sociologist at Harvard, suggested that I make a film about myself. She said that I was in a unique position, being a filmmaker and about to be mother, to do a film about what it would be like to have a baby. She was interested in a particular subject. Do you change your relationship to your mother during this period? And I said, are you crazy? What a narcissistic thing to do, to make a film about myself. It's unheard of. She said, well, it's done all the time in literature. And I said, well, no, but not in documentary. And I was embarrassed to even think about it. But then I would lie in bed at night and say, this is not a crazy idea. I could see how to do this and structure a film. Now, there had not been any documentaries that had been about private people's lives that I knew of. They were about public events, political events, car races. I just edited a film about a man on death row. But the idea that you would turn a camera and make a film about an ordinary person's life, which we now all take for granted, was simply unheard of. But it began to form in my head how to go about doing this and how to bring my family into it, how to structure it. And the problem was to find somebody to do the film with. And I had met Claudia Weil, who was then a senior at Radcliffe. And I remember inviting her to have dinner with me and being very embarrassed about broaching a subject. There I sat with my great big belly saying, Claudia, would you like to do a film with me about me? And she leapt into it. She had great enthusiasm, and we proceeded over the next year to do this film that turned out to be Joyce at 34.
We may not go all the way over there. I mean, if you're worrying about way in there, let's forget about it.
I tell you what, why don't we avoid this specific right here?
Okay.
Here we can do.
Okay, but no, forget about it. That's fine.
Okay, I was worried about...
No, don't worry there. Okay. But if we can do from here on, and the steps down here, too.
The reason that I got into documentary is that it was a passport into the world. You know, growing up in a kind of upper middle class home with not much exposure to the world or the real world, as it were. Documentaries was an incredible passport to be able to go to China, live with the black family and get in Washington, whatever, just to explore, to see.
How does it feel to be a baby and to learn all these wonderful things about the world? So let's get ready for school.
When I was making documentaries, I was not an information documentary filmmaker. So my documentaries tended to be about people, their stories, very subjective.
You're looking around the place, cruising, right? And fairly quickly after that,
Not a Pretty Picture is an autobiographical film, basically cutting back and forth between a fictionalized depiction of the events of my life leading up to my own rape in high school and then the events following that rape.
Rick? Hey, Rick. Guess who's not here?
Yeah, I can understand why you wouldn't be here.
Come on, Rick. Come on. It's here. Maybe something wrong or something in here.
Come here. Just give me
The documentary was a way of feeling legitimate making a film. In other words, the right-onness, somehow being righteous, it comes out of the 60s, being on the right side, creating a cinema that put into the world the voices, you know, that spoke about the issues that mainstream cinema wasn't talking about. That was what one wanted to do. I think intellectually, filmmakers like myself, documentary filmmakers, were becoming quite frustrated with certain conceits in documentary, and that propelled them as well into writing, taking responsibility for the films they were making. There's a way in which documentary filmmakers, myself included, don't take responsibility really for what's said in a film. They allow people to speak for them, and then they, under the guise of only creating the truth by only using what they found when they shot, don't acknowledge authorship, don't acknowledge that they are writing a text in the cutting room, in the choice of who speaks, etc. And I was frustrated also with the conceit of that and wanted to make film that this is what I wrote and this is what I meant to say.
I think I just got so sick of following people around, waiting for them to say what I wanted them to say, and then spending months in the editing room manipulating what they had said into what I wanted them to say, that I figured there had to be an easier way to make films. So I applied for a grant, a $10,000, you know, AFI filmmakers grant, and that was the beginning of Girlfriends. Girlfriends was like this turgid little personal thing that I just had to get off my chest. It wasn't, aha, this is a timely issue, you know. But I think I was enormously lucky because when I went out in the spring to LA to try and sell it, to show, you know, screened it for studios, An Unmarried Woman had just opened, and Turning Point had just opened. And I think those two films set the stage, you know, so that a studio could perceive, oh, a film about women could make money. This might be worth our while. And I think if I had gone out with that film even 6 months earlier, I might not have been able to sell it.
I think that the women in film, in recent history, meaning the last 20 years, or 30 years, has been very hit or miss. Elaine May's features came out at a time when I was just starting to make films. But then after Elaine, there wasn't anybody. There was sort of this gap. And then there were, you know, the Jones, Joan Silver and Joan Tewksbury and Joan Darling, and they were great. They were really paving the way, and they got their shots, and Claudia too at that time. And each of them are good, you know, successful working directors, but those films were, you know, they didn't do well, or they weren't marketed, or they weren't nothing happened really right with them enough to make Hollywood say, my God, women are it. This is it. We've got to make more women's pictures.
When I started, there was Joan Darling, Joan Micklin Silver, Karen Arthur, myself, for a brief moment, Jane Wagner. And the doors opened reluctantly, and we all kind of rushed through at the same time. And then there was a tremendous setback around 1980 when the whole industry sort of caved in on itself. And I can't remember, but they went from making like 200 films a year, and then suddenly 97 were being made. And so there was this huge pulling back in, and women were not employed at that particular time. I mean, there were too many men who were out there and unemployed who got the jobs. And in about the last, since Susan Siedelman, in Desperately Seeking Susan, her film opened the door, I think, for women.
There was a woman production executive at Orion at the time in 1980, I guess it was 83, 84, right before Desperately Seeking Susan, and that she was the one that gave me the go-ahead. That was probably pretty instrumental. Her name was Barbara Boyle, and I think that she definitely was, I mean, her goal was really to try to get women to direct more movies.
I had gone on my hands and knees to get this film made in Orion. I begged them to let me do it. They put all kinds of financial restraints on the production. They were going to take a chance, but in a very, very limited way. And it was my responsibility from beginning to end to make sure it came on time, on budget. Now I had a relatively first-time director who had done one $80,000 film. He had already talked me into Ed Lockman, who had done a series of European productions, but no real quote-unquote Hollywood film, who all he talked about was diva. And God forbid this should be diva, because it didn't really warrant the financial investment that Orion was about to make, even though it was artistically very successful. And now she wanted to use Madonna, someone who had never acted.
And I remember when I told Orion originally about Madonna, at first they, well, first they didn't know who she was, and then encouraged me to try to audition other actresses who were more famous, because they really wanted to get a name, what they called a name, in that part. And when we started the movie, again, it was really strange because when we first started filming, Madonna was much less well-known than Rosanna Arquette was. And then in the course of filming, I guess over about a 9-week period, it was kind of phenomenal how she kind of went from being relatively nothing to being on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. And then by the time we finished the film and it was about to be released, she was on the cover of, I guess it was Time or Newsweek.
So I fought Susan tooth and nail. We finally agreed to have a screen test of Madonna. And then, of course, Madonna came to see me. And, I mean, she was as outrageous as can be. She came in, bent down on her hands and knees, and said to me, what do I have to do to get this part? I said, look, I have real problems with your acting in this movie. It is not the lead, but it's an important part. And you've never acted before. I want you to do a screen test.
She kept a diary. It's great stuff. Couldn't sleep. Went into kitchen. Gary came in. Turned on light. Gary left. Finished birthday cake. Pages of it. It's gotta be a cover. Nobody's life could be this boring.
I kind of believe that if somebody's interesting, hopefully you can get some of what makes them unique onto the film. And if you can, that it's more exciting than using a traditional actor or actress.
Well, they did the screen test. And, of course, Susan called me up before she sent it. They did it in New York. Before she sent it to me in California and said, now, whatever you think about the screen test, I still believe in Madonna. So I already knew the screen test hadn't gone very well. But the belief in the director was so strong, and my belief in Susan was so strong, that I said yes.
I was really in a fortunate situation in that being a woman actually was an advantage because there were so many other women involved in the project. And then because Susan was successful, I don't think after that being a woman became an issue because I had sort of proven myself in the marketplace.
I think that every success that has happened to a woman director has changed things for other women directors. I mean, I obviously experienced Valley Girl's effect on me. It was my film, so it was a big effect. But I know right around that time is when suddenly other women were starting to get jobs. And I think that Valley Girl had something to do with it, as did Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That film made good money, and a lot of money. And it opened doors and made things more accessible for other women directors. And you know, Desperately Seeking Susan was very important, too, because of its acceptance by the public, and it was a highly respected film. So all these films have done women a lot of good. The sad part is that the flops made by women are somehow held against those directors and held against all women directors, more, I think, than similar flops by male directors.
I think more somehow is expected of women. Certainly it was true in the 60s and 70s. And I don't think it's getting much better now. And there are two kinds of flops or successes. One is commercial and one is artistic. If you have a film that is a commercial flop, but is at least artistically applauded, you will, as a woman or a man, work again. I think if you're a man and your first picture is a flop, I think you have an easier time, but it's still hard to get your second picture.
It's hard because if you're a woman, very often what you're trying to do is things that are more marginal. And therefore you're censored by whatever economic systems occur in this culture that say, no, that's not an economically viable idea. But as it turns out, if you make a film that then does well, people say, oh, anything you want to do next. It's kind of what's happening with Working Girls. We couldn't get any money after the grants, and now since it's doing well at the box office, at least in New York, people are calling me and saying, hey, what's your next project?
Box office? Hello? No. Old Boyfriends made $1.50, you know. So there were no invitations to come back and do it again, you know. And it's like Oliver Stone, who did The Hand. That movie probably made $1.50 too. Fortunately, he wrote some other things, which allowed him entree back in as a director.
It's a terrible thing to admit, but I would really like to have a box office hit. My films have all paid for themselves and made money, but, you know, the $50 million grosser is what all of us filmmakers need in order to be able to make the films that we want to make.
So it's kind of ironic that it's only box office that ends up making things easier, because that's economic censorship at its worst. I'd almost rather deal with the censorship of a censor board or a ratings board, because at least there you know that the ideas can be confronted. You get arguments, you get dialogue about it. there's often an outcry, and the outcry ends up politicizing a lot of people. However, with economic censorship, no one's politicized in the process. You just end up not being able to make your movies.
Right there, well.
Aha!
Sure, why not?
How's that? This is for Peters in the up position?
Yeah.
How's it look?
It's good. You're going to have to give the girls on the side, take them out just a little bit so they don't get noises.
Okay.
Take a look. It's actually nice.
And Veranda's gonna have to, oops, sorry. You guys in this particular shot will cheat back just a little. Yeah, that's great. That's plenty. And go. And he's gonna... Okay. That's a cut.
Really, where a lot of us got our breakthrough was in comedy or teen comedy. And then we're facing the problem of breaking out of comedy or teen comedy. It's really incredible what goes on in the genre of teen comedy. And what's amazing is sometimes I'm shocked. I get a script and I read it and I think, how could they possibly offer this to me? What is my public image that they would think I would ever do this? So to me, it's not a problem because I simply turn it down.
Unfortunately, with women, if they do a successful teen comedy, they're not altogether offered the great action-adventure movie that we talked about, or they're not altogether offered a different kind of story. They're offered another teenage comedy because it's like, she can do this, but can she do anything else? So why take a chance and let her do this again?
I've been fortunate to be typecast by making films that have to do with issues or have to do with more serious types of statements, heavy dramatic statements, dealing with psychosis or neurosis or what have you. And that's great for me because that's the kind of thing I want to see when I go to the theater. That's the kind of thing I want to read when I'm reading books. So I'm very happy to be typecast in that realm.
I think that I have been extremely lucky in the material that has come my way, that it hasn't fallen into any particular box, you know, and that people have not looked at me as, oh, a woman director, that means she can only do things about kids or about this or that or whatever. I have also waited long periods of time between the things that I've done. I've waited till the right thing came along.
I'm not going away. I did the wrong thing. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Tell me what to say.
I was offered other features before children, teen comedies, and that's something I just don't relate to. I don't feel like my teenage years were very different from the way most of these films are told. I never went to the prom. I didn't care about the prom. It was not an issue in my life who was taking me to the prom. So a movie about that is not something that I can bring something to. But to film about people who are wounded and struggle with their emotions, that's the kind of material that interests me. That's where I was in my teenage years and where my life has been, and I think that's what I have to bring to material. So I've waited until things have come along that I felt that I really had something to say about that I could do well.
Man, you want to talk to me? Then you learn my language. Did you understand that? Of course you did. You've probably been reading lips for years, but that's the great control game, isn't it? I'm the controller. What a fucking joke. Now, come on. Speak to me. Speak. Speak to me.
I had a big fascination with anger, you know, and trying to understand why people are angry and how they let it out. And so I tried to incorporate that into The Boys Next Door and Suburbia.
You gonna get a burn?
Guess so.
I never thought twice about getting mine.
Is that right? Why not?
'Cause I have so many scars already.
What kind of scars?
These kind.
Jesus. What's that from?
Oftentimes people think that my films have a sociological stance, and you know, I'm very interested. I pick films because I'm interested in some sort of social issue that they might strike up. For years now, I've been known as the rebel filmmaker, and I really didn't know that I was coming from that you know, position. It's just me, I guess, you know. I guess I was a teenage rebel or something and never quite grew out of it. But, hello, must be my mother. That'll stop. I would say the kind of filmmaker that I am is, I'm somewhat controversial, I think, you know.
I'm not a director for hire, so the chances of me finding a script that's exactly what I want to direct are pretty slim. So for me, and because I don't write my own material, I have to read a lot of stuff and think a lot about the kinds of films I would be interested in making before I plunge into something, because the actual making of the film is interesting, but it better be about something I really feel strongly about, or else it's too much hard work. There's some directors that just like the activity of making a film. I don't. I find parts of it interesting, parts of it exhausting, but it's really the subject matter that appeals to me, or the tone of the movie that appeals to me, so it better be about something I like. I grew up in this very, I think it's pretty much typical middle-class suburban neighborhood in Philadelphia, where everyone pretty much in the neighborhood was similar to some extent. And there was a part of me, at least growing up, that felt somewhat different from the surroundings. I mean, I was always kind of curious about things outside of the little world I was living in. But I always sort of thought that to be curious about those things was wrong in a way, you know, that there were certain ways I was supposed to act and certain ways I was supposed to dress, and if you didn't do those things, you were considered bad or a bad girl. But one of the things that I found, I guess the reason that I became attracted to film directing was that it enabled me in a way to kind of go into worlds that maybe I wasn't ordinarily able to enter, and break down some of that division between what's good and what's bad, and maybe show some of that gray area in between.
It's very bad. Sauce nut car. I just can hardly believe it. It's true. It's all true.
I got the idea for American Cousin back in 1972. I heard a song on the radio. It was Johnny Horton singing The Battle of New Orleans. Well, I ran through the bush and I ran through the brambles. And it twigged in my mind the memory of this wonderful, gorgeous, fabulous boy who had shown up at the ranch in the middle of a hot, still summer night. And my parents were very English, and nothing was ever supposed to happen between, you know, like 9 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, this beautiful boy arrived and turned everything around, upside down. He was so exciting, I couldn't believe that we were even related to him. And then he was gone in a cloud of dust.
Never gone so fast in all my life.
Yeah?
Yeah, I thought we were gonna die. But you know, it was sort of fun. I was sure we were gonna die. I don't know why boys have to go so fast.
Because it's fun, that's why.
Yeah, sort of scary fun. But you know, my mom would kill me if she knew we went that fast. Yeah, I thought we were all gonna die and I was never gonna live to be a teenager.
So anyway, I thought, well, this would make a nice movie because you've got the boy, the girl, the car, that wonderful age of innocence back in 1959.
I used to see movies, and in theaters too, in Martinique. I grew up in Martinique. It's a French island in the Caribbean. And every time we had a chance to see a black actor in the movie, it was always an American movie, but all the time black parts, you know, very stupid part. And I made a kind of wish. I said, I have to be a filmmaker. I have to talk about my people. I have to show what the black actors they can play, and to give the real image of us, not stereotype like that. And the idea worked in my mind during many years. And when I got 14 years old, I found the book, the novel, Sugarcane Alley, in French is Rue Cazenègre. And it was an event, because it was the first time of my life I have the chance to have it between my hands, a novel written by a black writer from my country. I say, oh my God, that will be my first movie. I have to make that because that's so real. That us, you know. We need to write story for our people and give them the chance to play too. And it's why I realized and I say, I have to be a filmmaker. I have to do that.
Initially, I wanted to make a film about an intimate relationship between two women. And I felt it hadn't been done before, at least in the history of the American cinema, in a way that
ended in something other than a bisexual triangle or suicide or multiple suicides. And I came across this book, Desert of the Heart, that Jane Rule had written. Actually, one of the studios had been interested in the book, tried to buy it from her. She turned down the offer because she felt it would be altered in a way that might be unacceptable to her, and ended up selling it to me. And I proceeded to write a screenplay and go out and raise $1 million. It took me 2.5 years to do that.
We had 31 days to shoot it, 5-6-day weeks. Everybody was working for scale. It was a non-union crew that was working on a weekly salary. It was hard. It was, you did not have any contingency days. If a scene was scheduled for the morning, it had to be shot in the morning. And in the end, I think that overcoming that and working within that frame caused a camaraderie, and it forced a trust. The only way we could do it was by not having any kind of power struggle or soap opera drama going on behind the cameras. It all had to, channels of communication had to be kept clear so that the time was spent in front of the camera and getting it right there.
The fight is for a certain cinema being made by artists. Like a writer writes, a painter paints, you know. I like the film to come from nowhere to a film. This is also films, which means coming from places I've seen, emotions, stories, or thoughts, or ideas, and they all come together to become a shot, then another shot, then a film. And think in the cutting room and cut myself so it makes it has the shape I wanted, you know. I believe in that cinema for myself. I'm not saying that other shapes of filmmaking or producing are not good, and they produce beautiful films that I watch in theaters. But for what I want to do, I want to have it made as an artist. I mean, I feel myself responsible for what I do.
You must be very keen about the reasons why you make a film. That's why I make so few. I only made 2, besides the documentary I made on Lillian Gish. Because I discovered in my life the freedom, not only inside, but outside. I never fought to be a star or to stay a star. I wanted to keep the pleasure, the enthusiasm, and not run after money, not be aware of the charts and say I'm number 1, I'm number 2, but just to live my life and be myself. And I make a film only if I feel there's strong desire.
When I came to New York in the early 70s and got involved and politicized by feminism, though I wasn't in any groups or anything like that, what I realized and what shocked me so much was the enormous split between the white middle-class feminists and black women who wouldn't call themselves feminists, and other non-white women who also did not call themselves feminist or speak the language of the middle-class feminists. So I decided I had to make a film in which I could bring these two, what seemed to be opposing groups together, since there seemed to be no dialogue at all. And for me, that was the challenge of Born in Flames. I had to see if it was possible. If I could create a microcosm in which I could have women talking to each other in languages that were different, then I could then believe that it was possible.
Okay, punch up VTR 3.
Based on
Do
my
it,
own
fucker!
personal experience. During the...
Ready on VTR 3.
Zella Wiley here.
All
We
right.
interrupt this broadcast to talk to you about the murder of Adelaide Norris by federal agents. Go right ahead. They called it suicide, but a lot of people don't buy that lie. She was murdered because she stood against the betrayal of women. We're being sold down the river, at home, at work, and in the media. And now the president wants to pacify us with wages for housework.
I think Born in Flames cost about $30,000, but it could have cost more like 40, and there was a lot of barter. And so a lot of things didn't cost anything, but they would have had I done a regular movie. It was an impossible film to do. I mean, I knew I couldn't get financing. I mean, how do you get financing? You don't have a script, and you say it's about all these black radical lesbians underground who are taking over the media, and then they're going to blow up the World Trade Center. Nobody in their right mind is going to give you money.
I had graduated from film school in 1977, and I had been making short films, and I knew I wanted to make a feature. I knew at that point I wanted to direct a feature narrative film, but I'm also somewhat realistic in the sense that I knew if I went to Hollywood and started knocking on doors, no one would hire me to do that, and nor did I ever really have a desire to live in Los Angeles. So I stayed friendly with a group of people, the same group of people that I had worked on the short films with, and we decided that if we pooled our resources and didn't get paid, that with a limited amount of money, we'd be able to make a low-budget feature film.
I had to convince the French producers that I can make the movie, because for them, I was very young, I was black and a woman, you know? 3 things, you know, very hard to assume for them. And I had a story with just black people, no star, no French actors, nothing. And when I got the French for the government, I fight during 2 years.
It was so tedious and overbearing. I mean, talking to so many people, meeting with so many people, all to get that check. So I finally had to make this rule after so many lunches and dinners and breakfasts and meetings and cocktails and all that. I just made a rule that I would meet somebody twice for lunch or dinner or whatever it was. On the 3rd meeting, if they didn't give me the check, I never had lunch or dinner or breakfast with them again.
In Smithereens, originally I was able to raise about $25,000, $30,000, and I thought I could make an entire feature for that amount of money. And we planned on shooting for about 5 weeks. And by the end of the 2nd week, I think we had used up about $20,000. And I had no idea where we were going to get the money for the rest of the shoot.
I stole everything. Anytime I needed a location, I would go and I'd steal it. I'd steal demonstrations. I'm even on, I think, an FBI list because I did a secretary's strike on Wall Street, which actual secretaries participated in because I guess they wanted to strike. But I would go to places like the airport and steal a scene and get out faster than the guards could stop me. And working with different camera people, I must have worked with 20 camera people, and when I couldn't find anybody, I shot myself.
We ran out of money several times. We would have to take the whole crew, take the subway from location to location, and I was cooking food for the crew at the same time as directing at times.
My goal was not only to make the picture, but it was to get out of debt. I mean, if you imagine going out on a branch and you go further and further until to come back would like break the bow. You have to sort of like continue on this branch. I mean, there is a point of no return.
There's a lot of pressure that comes from lack of money. And there's a lot of pressure that comes from the source of a lot of money. And I'd say they're about equal pressures. So, you know, the fact that it's the film business, not the film art, the fact that you're dealing with money to make film means that, you know, it's not a pure form.
Ray produced Hester Street mainly to fill the void since nobody else was willing to produce or allow me to make a movie. He raised the money and produced Hester Street. When we finished Hester Street, we took it around to both the studios, and naturally we had alleged to our investors, most of whom were people who had invested in Ray's real estate ventures, Ray is my husband, that we, of course, would be able to get the film released. But when the majors saw it, they felt it was a black and white film with Yiddish and subtitles and nobody in it and the usual things that majors think about things like that. And the minor distributors at that time seemed to feel that the best thing they could do was to put it out sort of in 16, hit the synagogue circuit, maybe colleges, and it bothered us a lot because by that time the film had gone to Cannes and had done extremely well, which was fantastically helpful to the film and allowed it to move from a sort of small art film circuit to really a very wide break. It's an example of an extraordinarily successful independent film.
Getting a film made, as you know, is so hard. You know, I was a rash young woman once, but I am no longer so rash. It's so critical. I respect almost every film that gets made just for having been made. And for women, not so much because the industry's against women, but for women to take on that responsibility, to take on that burden as products of a patriarchal society. I respect it. And everyone who makes one in some way creates bed, you know, creates road for the next people to go on.
In the
40s, there were many things that were unique about Ida Lupino, but certainly one of them was, of course, that as an actress, she left this established studios and formed her own company with Collier Young, an independent film company. And that was a very courageous move in those days, but a very necessary one of innovative films that she wanted to make. Ida then became, I think, the first writer, producer, director of any woman. And of course, most of her work as an early director was done in the 50s. She liked to tackle controversial subjects. And of course, at that time, the studios, as usual, were playing it rather safe. And Ida came up with ideas that were not really so acceptable to already established patterns in the studio. And so she and Collier did subjects like the film that I did for Ida, which was called Outrage, which dealt for the first time in American film on the subject of rape. Ida came up with very offbeat things. She wanted to see films made that were not being made at that time. She dealt with the subject of rape, of bigamy, of unwed mothers, psychopathic killers. She really tackled issue kinds of films. She had a definite authority. She knew what she wanted. She was able to get it. She was very well prepared, and she was very creative. She chose people that she worked well with, and she really got everyone to work as a team. That, I think, was her greatest strong point. Everybody loved working with her. I once asked Ida, how did you decide to become a director? And she said, well, she didn't really decide to become a director, but as an actress, she was spending long hours on sets. And so she got bored. And she would sit for long hours in between scenes, and finally she began to ask questions. And she'd talk to the lighting people, and then she'd talk to the prop people, and then she'd go and look through the camera, and then she would watch how the director directed other scenes, and she became really vitally interested in it. And then, of course, inevitably, the ideas began to form. I think I would do that differently. And so out of that, she really learned the whole technique of film just from being bored on the set.
As an actor, I thought after my role was done, why isn't the film out? I didn't even realize there was an editorial process or anything. So I went for a real quick crash course at UCLA and absolutely fell passionately in love with the process of making movies. And I made my first little film and took it around thinking that, of course, the world would herald a new talent. And I was patted on the head a lot by everybody. And so then I thought, well, fine, they need to see that I can really make a film. So I went out and made Legacy, which was a feature film. Then I drugged that around, 35 millimeter, all of that. Again, the pats on the head. And because I had been an actress, I knew a lot of producers in Hollywood. And so I had, at least I could get the door open. I would say, I want to direct this. And they would look at the film. And finally, at that time, women were not directing. There were no women directors. Ida Lupino was the last person to hold a DGA card. And I went to a friend of mine who was the creator of Rich Man, Poor Man. And it was just about to go into episodic. And I begged him, I'd known him many years ago, and I begged him to give me a chance. And he saw my work, and he said, fine, I will do it. And he went to the tower, and he fought for me. And they said, four-letter word, her, don't give her the job. I mean, he said, you don't understand. I don't want to fuck her. I want to give her a chance she can direct. And he put his job on the line. And that was how I got my DGA card. And when I would show up to work at Universal, the stage would be filled with crew from other sets who would wander in and out all day long to see the broad direct, right, with the cigars and the whole number. And it was so wonderful to me to see that ultimately it doesn't matter. If you're an orangutan, you can direct if the crew knows pretty soon that you can direct, and then they let you be.
Ida Lupino and Dorothy Arzner, their approach to directing truly had been to be part of this male construct.
Bergman was a very important director for me because he is very interested in psychological things.
Like I like Martin Scorsese's work a lot because his work has sort of a texture to it.
I like Godard, Scorsese, too. I like Woody Allen.
Most important is Chantal Ackerman. It was very interesting in what she was doing, and perhaps it's her that gave me the strength to make films.
Lizzie Borden was instrumental, probably the single most instrumental person in my starting to make movies.
Had a reputation as an actress and also as a screenwriter, and they all wanted me to stay with that, and that my husband does the film, and that our collaboration ends with that. And also, sure, because I'm a woman, and in this time when I started, there were already some women doing films, but they were not so, they just very low-budget films, and And the reputation of the German cinema at this time were only men, were Volker Schlondorf, Kluge, Wim Wenders, Rainer Werner Fassbinder. And the women came up only in the midst of the 70s.
It was not enough to be just an actress. It fulfilled me for quite a number of years. But I mean, the difference between, you know, saying somebody else's words and sort of waiting around and hanging around for the telephone to ring, and your agent will say, you know, somebody's asked for you to do this part, and usually it was bad anyway. Didn't want to do it. I didn't want to compromise anymore.
After over 20 years of acting, the lack of control that you have as an actress is really frustrating. You create a character or create what you can from the writer's script. You see her a certain way, and then the director or the producer, or worse, the studio, in the name of making money, changes that, cuts it out, molds it into something that they see, which has nothing to do with your work. So you're left, you basically are a limbless person as an actor in movies. And the amount of self-expression that you can have is really limited. As a director, obviously, it's your vision and you're the boss.
The conversation I had with Orson Welles concerning my directing happened just before he started the filming of the trial, and I was part of the distribution. And at that time, he used to stay at the Hotel Meurice, just opposite what is the new museum now, Museum d'Orsay. It was the station, railway station. And we drank a lot. And then I said, I'd love to film, be a director. He said, why not? He said, when it becomes painful, that means that you should. He's the only one who really said, do it. Other directors, even Francois, who was so close to me, they didn't like the idea of me directing. I was the image of the film star, of the woman, a sort of idealization.
When my first script, I wrote the script, and I was willing to do it on myself, and it was written for me, and I gave it to a television station, whom we did several films before, Volker and me, in screenwriting and so. And they said, yeah, it's a lovely story, but why don't you act and let your husband do the direction? Why changing something? And I said, please, let me do it on myself. And they didn't do it. I had to go to another station and to convince them, and then they didn't want to do it neither, and they just gave me little money. And then my husband went to them, and I'm sure he never said to me, but I'm sure he said, please be quiet. If she doesn't come up with a film, I will finish it. And so he gave them the guarantee that they will have a film, you know.
At one point, I thought, well, what I need is really more understanding about camera, and so therefore I went to Universal, and I began to work in the loading room, cleaning the slates and the clapper boards and loading the magazines in the graveyard shift from like 3 o'clock in the morning until 8. Thinking, well, I'll move in through camera that way. And it's so interesting because so many of the women that I know that are now successful directors, like Randa Haynes, who started out also doing script, Jill Godmill, I mean, there's so many women who learned to be a director or learn to be a producer through doing with their hands the actual craft.
5 years into that process of working as a script supervisor, I began to think about directing myself. People were often coming up to me on the set and saying, you know, you should be directing. So I was often working with first-time directors, as with that very first film, and helping them, thinking along with them, trying to anticipate problems. And so very often I would be, whispering suggestions in their ear, maybe you could try, da-da-da. And then they'd say, okay, we're going to try, da-da-da-da. And then I'd say, gee, I'd like to be able to say that out loud myself, and see if I could do this. And so it took another 5 years before I really had the opportunity to say it out loud myself, and that was through the directing workshop for women at the AFI.
It was a long time ago, and there was Lee Grant and me and Lily Tomlin and Karen Arthur and a lot of really good women, Maya Angelou. Really had, I think, one of the best creative experiences of my life, writing, directing, and starring in, no ego here, a movie about a woman who had a hard time with relationships with men. And the experience of being in control, of not having anyone tamper with how I saw my little movie, of working with actors from the other side of the camera was really a joy.
A lot of young women filmmakers were dying to be a part of it, and they could only take 8 or 10 of us. I forget how many were in the first batch. So there was a little annoyance that Margot Kidder, for instance, or Lee Grant, or women of stature in other parts of the arts were being invited in. Between all of us, we sort of thought it was a wonderful idea. But as we began working, we began to see the value was that the AFI sort of knew that these women who had access to making films and who were serious about it would be able to go on and indeed make a dent in the industry and make some kind of enough of a splash that it would be like a beacon for these other women in later years to become a part of the program, which indeed has happened.
Frankly, I don't know if it's women or men. I haven't figured out who at studios actually does say yes. It seems to be attrition.
They expected a Mrs. Boyle, but somehow they expected her to be 50 and weigh 400 pounds. And here they had someone who weighed 110 pounds.
When I went to UA, because in the first days of going to a new studio, you're always allowed a certain amount of leeway and a certain amount of yes.
They may work with a director who they give a supervisory fee to, but they do not put up the 10 or 12 or 15 million dollars.
I'd like to run a studio, but I like it to be my studio, not somebody else's.
When I first got here, which was now 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, there were very, very few women executives. And the women executives in the business, in general, now this is a generalization, were not in positions of great power. And their jobs did depend on the opinions of the males around them. And there was not a great networking or support system between women. And generally, if you were a woman, you didn't want to hang your... In fact, when I first got here, the advice I got was don't hang your career on another woman because she's having a hard enough time, she's not going to give you a break.
When I came here 15 years ago, you talk about making a woman's movie, and everybody thought, oh, you're going to make some dreary menopausal film about women and their struggle, and what are they going to do about their bodies, as opposed to that they could ever be good and commercial and fun, and that women had anything else to talk about. So that's changed. And most importantly, I think the women who have the jobs have changed. I think at the beginning, all of us were keeping our eyes on each other rather than what we were doing. And there was a tendency to be divided and competitive with one another. And the more secure the women have become, the closer the allegiance and the more desire to fight for them. But I think women in power, not just in the movie business, but a lot of places, become like many people who get to positions of power, and they're concerned about helping their own. I don't want to appear too feminist, I don't want to fight for women to do this, but I think finally that self-consciousness is changing.
I think there's been a lot of talk that women have been prejudiced against in the movie business. And in my opinion, what happened is that A, there were very few women who had studied directing, and B, there were very few women who had the talent, really, to direct these movies. So we're new to this business. I know that there have been a few people around many years ago, but basically in quantity we're new. We're new acquiring skills. We're new going to school. We're new studying. And now there are quite a few directors. And as we have quite a few directors, we have, obviously, a huge proportion of talented female directors. And they're getting work now. And they're getting number 1A projects. I mean, Randa Haynes, you know, is a very good example, but there are other examples also. So I think that if a woman wants to direct and she studies directing and she has the talent, she will be allowed to direct at any studio. I don't think there's any prejudice whatsoever.
First of all, I mean, there's no reason this business should be different than the rest of the world, and that's the way it is right now. I mean, women do not have totally equal rights, and that's the way it is. And this business is part of the world. It is basically run by men. The top positions are by men. The companies that own the companies are run by men. And the women the executives that have more power, I think some of them almost go out of the way. They almost have to bend over backwards a bit not to. They're afraid that it's going to look like they're showing favor to women.
Okay, you want to try rehearsal?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I just want to take a look.
That's flattering enough for you, Sandy.
Yeah, that'll be good. And Jeremy, where are you?
Jeremy's going to be right beside Cameron.
And then he'll just run into it.
You want to just run in for a second?
Just run right past.
Okay, settle in, folks.
I see. Oh, yeah, that's nice. Okay.
A lot of the power and the money and the control is watched over by men, and a lot of those men don't yet feel comfortable in dealing with a woman on an equal footing. You know, they're far more used to having women either as images up on the screen or as actresses or secretaries, people they can either dismiss or divorce, or, you know, if it doesn't go well, they can close the door and they'll be gone.
There are very few women with power, and when the women have power, I think that they are very careful about distributing it to other women because they don't want to look like that's their goal. They want to get in there and act like the men, and it's understandable, I suppose. I haven't felt any woman executive in particular reaching out to me, with the exception of some people I knew through Roger, like Barbara Boylan.
It's much more open than it was, and there are more women shooting films. But until a woman owns a film studio, until a woman comes with $100 million in her repertoire, you know, I don't think it's going to be much easier at all. Because really, money is power.
Yeah, all the way down. Back.
Whoa. Yes.
We're going to be coming down a lot quicker than we did in rehearsal.
Okay.
So there have to be people filling in faster.
Right.
Have the SWAT guys move on action, okay? Background means that these guys with the mushroom work, okay?
And markers, background. Getting the shotgun out of the trunk.
Frame.
Action.
Arliss.
Move back.
And that's the cut. And
marker. And marking.
Where we make progress is when they're saying, let's look for who's going to direct this picture, and on that list is 3 guys and 3 women. You know, that's it. I mean, indiscriminate of whether or not you're a man or a woman, but having to do with the material and whether that person is going to bring something to that material. And that is something that is still a long way away from where we are, though there are some producers and some executives in this town who do think that way. And that change from 10 years ago is enormous.
Well, I think the process often of a good director is to circle in on an idea. And you might not get it quite right, and you keep changing it and refining it. And often, if a woman director does it, I think it's perceived as indecision or not knowing what she wants.
If you are opinionated, if you have a particular vision, if you have a way you want to go and you're adamant about it, you are very often perceived to be difficult, whereas a man is perceived to be strong. And you have to probably bend more, show yourself flexible more, not to the crew, to studio executives, to powerful agents, so forth and so on, to people who may own your scripts. And their ability and their desire to remove you from a project can be kindled much more quickly, I think, if you're a woman. And they just want you to be pliant, I think, to a much greater degree. It's quickly, you can be very quickly called a bitch, where instead of a leader.
I've been asked this question all the time, is it hard being a woman filmmaker? And yes, it is. But the problems have to do with being raised in this culture, feeling illegitimate to spend $1 million on an idea you have, feeling illegitimate giving orders, feeling illegitimate believing in your bizarre way of doing it up against the, critical expertise and talent of people who've done it 25 times more than you and who say, can't do it that way. Those are the problems of being a woman filmmaker. Feeling entitled, feeling legitimate, trusting yourself, asking for what you want. I struggle with them all the way through and go in and out of, having it together in that sense. There are other problems, but that's the big one, I think, is the sense of legitimacy. And that you get from the culture, not from the film industry.
A lot of people have said to me recently, oh, as a woman, how can you direct? How can you be a dictator? How can you
tell people what to do. But I think women in particular, I don't know, not all women, but I use more, I think, female approaches to directing. It may be more manipulative on some level. It may be more coercion. It may be trying to talk people into doing things. And on some level, it's much more collaborative, I think. I don't feel like I go in as a dictator, but both with the crew I work with and the cast, I really like the idea of people giving suggestions, and I take a lot of suggestions. For me, that I don't think cuts down on who I am as a director. But my sense is with directing is you get to know what you want, and even things you don't know that you can do, you end up doing. Like those stories of a woman moving a car off her baby. You end up having the strength to do that, and you grow into the role.
The first day that I showed up for work on Rich Man, Poor Man, which was the first time that I'm dealing with now 75 people instead of 15, as you know, when you make your smaller films, you do. And I walk in and meet with the AD, and he says, well, you know, obviously we're doing this scene first, and therefore we're going to be down here in the living room, and you're going to want that wall out. I know you're going to want the camera here. So I had the guys move the wall, so we're that much ahead of the game. And I stopped. And I realized that, indeed, I did want the wall removed. I said, I knew this was it. It was one of those moments where, you know, and of course everybody's standing around watching to see how I'm going to deal with this. And he said, well, I know that, and I said, no, I think you should put the wall back. And he said, but you don't understand. He said, I know you're a lady, and it's the first time you're on the set and all of this. And he said, so you really don't know. He said, it's going to take them a half an hour to put the wall back, at least. I said, I think you better put the wall back. He said, but then we'll be late in doing this scene. I said, don't worry about it. We won't do that scene first. We'll do this scene first. Because it's the same actors. It's the same wardrobe. And we're in the kitchen. So we'll just move to the kitchen while the guys are putting the wall back. So, of course, at the very end of the day, we got back around to finally shooting that scene. And I said to him, now you can remove the wall.
Anyone who engages in the film industry makes some sort of compromise on another kind of life. And the ramifications of choices that I made 15 years ago are just making themselves present. I made a shift in my family. My children went to have their permanent home with their father and a stepmother. And probably if I were to look at it today, I wouldn't make that decision today. I would figure out some other way to do it. But at the time, it was the only way that I could do it. That was a tremendous sacrifice. But yet I'm not sorry. I can't deny the fact that I wish it were different, but it was the only thing that I could do at that moment in time.
My marriage fell apart, which was partly to do with how some men find it difficult to deal with a woman who's very successful and straightforward and obsessed, you know, with her work. So that's something that you lose. I haven't had much of a social life, so I might have lost something out there, I don't know. I think almost all working mothers feel a little bit guilty, you know, that they should spend more time with their children or give their children more of themselves. But I try to balance that out and not feel so guilty about it anymore. I mean, it was very, I mean, I remember weeping a lot in the course of making My American Cousin. There were some very, very difficult times.
Can you raise a family and be in this industry and make a living at it? And if you make a living at it, do you miss entirely the growth of your children? Yes. Sometimes you do. Those are hard things to choose, you know.
I fight for cinema, and what comes into my cinema is related also, I guess, to whom I am, and my emotion, my knowledge of the world, my limits, or my needs, you know. I wouldn't sit and, well, once I did, when I did One Thing, the Other Doesn't, I wanted to make a statement about the feminist movement in France between, you know, like 65 and 75. But that was it was in a way like making a fictional documentary about it. But most of the time, I don't see myself,
as, you know, like sitting and say, okay, let's make a woman film. That would be ridiculous. I mean, when I kiss the people I like, when I work, when I read a book, I don't say, let's be a woman and read a book. Let's be a woman and meet friends, you know. I feel very good to be a woman. I'm very proud of being part of that bunch. But I fight for specific cinema in which people have their minds open and they use the tool of cinema to do different things.
What I've always felt is I am a feminist. I was formed during a period when the feminist movement was very strong, when women really emerged, when we learned a great deal about our society and about men and women. I came up through a very political time in the 60s. I'm a very consciously ethical, moral person. In fact, I would say I am a moralist. I'm very American. And so those are the things which I cannot make a film without. I can't lose those things. In becoming commercial, I have never lost those qualities. And I can't do movies that promote values which I feel are misogynistic or anti-humanistic or, you know, promote irresponsible political or social attitudes. I do, however, and always did, even in the documentaries, have characters in my movies who may be misogynistic, you know, immoral, unethical, because I think these are the things in life that we're all dealing with.
I spend more time worrying about what I don't want to say than what I do want to say. I may not always create wonderful role models for women because that's unrealistic. I mean, there's some terrible women in the world, just like there's some wonderful women, and the same with men. But I do try to be very careful not to be sexist or racist. From my point of view, that doesn't mean I can't have a character who's sexist or racist. That exists.
We as women have to make our own images about whatever we see. And that's what surprises me about people looking at Working Girls after Born in Flames, and they say, but you're a feminist, how could you do this movie? My feeling about prostitution is about making a film about prostitutes where it shows women controlling prostitution, and therefore, me as a female director, controlling the images that I want to be seen about prostitution. I think that's the most we can do as women.
Why don't you want to see me on equal terms?
Because from the way you talk about women, I don't think you like us very much.
I like you.
I like you, too. But I don't think you see us as equals.
I'll tell you one thing. As long as I'm paying for this, we're not equals.
Well, maybe that's why you come back every week. Maybe that's what makes it interesting for you.
So many films, and most of them have been by men, about prostitution, even the ones by women, tend to be highly sensational. And the women in them tend to be highly victimized, or there's a heavy sense of moralizing about the women. If they're not murdered by the killer, they're saved by the cop. And that was definitely what I wanted to avoid in Working Girls. By creating a structure where you could see the entire day pass, I thought I could really focus on work and show also that the myth that prostitution for women is about sexuality was only a myth.
Joseph is a light dominant session. Now, I know we don't do dominance here, but it is light, and he's such an old friend that I make an exception in his case. You don't mind, do you?
No.
Another thing, anytime you can, please answer the phone. I don't like for Dawn to do it. You know how she sounds. Now, there are hooks on the corners of the bed in the jungle room and ropes under the kitchen sink. Hello? No, I'm sorry. Monica is busy right now. Would you like to make an appointment for later? Okay. 4 o'clock would be just fine. What's your name?
I don't think anyone can get anything more from Working Girls than walking away with an image of Molly, who's not their stereotype of a prostitute. By putting out our own images and choosing how we want to show those images, we are, in fact, changing the world. I think images work on a much deeper level with people than any kind of argument.
I've come to feel that film is political, not because it prescribes a right-on political attitude, but that truly political film is film that changes the language, that creates language that's been impossible, unspeakable previously, that makes it possible to think things that were unthinkable before, that's political filmmaking. So that the most political film in the world, or what looks like the most political film in the world, Platoon, in fact, can be analyzed as being, if you ask me, not a very political film at all.
or The Killing Fields for that matter, which looks like a political film to me, takes the genocide of Cambodia and makes it background for a male love story. I don't call that political filmmaking. So in the higher sense, in the more intellectual sense, I think film is political, but only when it's used by a political person.
I choose this job not for the power, not for the money, because you must be crazy when you are making this kind of job, but I just love that. I just love it because to me it's a very difficult choice, and it's a very important choice for people, for women, for blacks, for, you know, all of that is very important.
The more women directors that we have, the more we will see the differences between women, and that to me is what's so exciting about having a lot of women directors. After all, that's what's exciting about having male directors. I mean, look at Howard Hawks, Sam Peckinpah, and Ingmar Bergman. These are three very different people, and when we can see women that are that talented and that different working in the world, it will be a very exciting time.